Hello there, John Puturillo here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining us for this episode. As usual, thanks to everybody who makes this work possible. And also, as usual, if you have concerns about yourself or somebody else, please do not take what you find on the internet or the media as advice. Seek advice from a professional or somebody else that you trust. If you are in Australia and are seeking counselling from me, my details will be in the description of this episode. In today's episode, it's my pleasure to welcome as my guest Benjamin Shure. Benjamin, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, John, for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Benjamin, tell us about yourself.
So basically, I work as a source channel, which basically is I help others with meditation, connecting to different areas of consciousness, a higher spirit and things like this. Also included is with energy healing, anything like this really. And in this life, I chose to have autism so that I can have this connection to what I call source. People call it God, creator, anything like this. For me, it's all the same kind of energy, just a higher power, if you like. So having autism helps me in this because it means I'm more sensitive to the different levels of energies, consciousness. For example, as a youngster, I could always feel energy as a tangible, as like a physical object. That's just because I was extra sensitive. And lots of people have autism. The ones that are, the majority of the ones that are non-verbal, is mainly because they're overwhelmed by a lot of different energy signals coming towards them. And it's sort of bombarding them. So I didn't used to speak so much due to being overwhelmed by things I didn't really understand. So until I learned to control energy, if you like, I started to speak more and feel more comfortable in more spaces.
That's fascinating, Benjamin, and links to Benjamin's work, where you can find him, will be in the description of this episode. So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing spirituality and different spiritual phenomena. We're going to be looking at different perspectives on it. We're going to be looking at alternative explanations for phenomena that we experience, and we're going to be critically analysing ideas. And as I normally do, I'd like to make clear that this is an exercise in taking judgment and emotional reactivity out of the discussion, discussing ideas at a more factual, neutral, objective level. There is a lot of controversy about what we don't understand, and I quite admittedly am a skeptic, but I don't want to judge what I don't understand. Rather, what I would like to do is ask more questions so that I can understand it better, and hopefully your listeners out there can learn something about critical analysis in these types of discussions, and go out into the world and conduct your own analysis so that you can learn in the same way that I get to have the great pleasure of learning with my guests. So, Ben, what exactly is the phenomenon of the past life? What does this mean for people who may not be familiar with it?
When I talk about a different life or something like this, it's coming from the perspective, or for those that resonate with this idea or perspective, that we are a soul having a human experience. I'm a soul, and I can remember other lifetimes where I was incarnated. So a past life regression is going into a deep state of consciousness through a series of breathing exercises and being guided perhaps, I say perhaps, by a facilitator that has worked with hypnosis or something like this. This is one way. We have a subconscious, and then we have a higher consciousness. And our subconscious, how I see it, is the bridge between the different areas of consciousness, if you like, and everything is stored within the subconscious. We can, how the body works and the memories connected to our soul, we can call it like that. So a lot of people may have had aspects of a past life regression while dreaming. This happens quite a lot. Sometimes if you had a dream and it's very, very vivid, for example, it felt like you actually were living it, but you weren't you as you know who you are now. But it still didn't feel so estranged. So this is one way. In fact, my first past life regressions were involuntary. it was going through what's called a spiritual awakening. I was experiencing lots of different dreams, we could say, but the body reacts in certain ways when there is a truth or resonance. It's normally like normally when the hairs on your arms, they sort of spring up, that kind of reaction. The body responds somehow. The soul is sending the message to the body saying, oh, this is kind of true. And then how I discovered it was real, or what I perceived to be real, was that I was having more and more memories of these in my daily life, so not in dream state, when I visited these other lifetimes.
So effectively, could we say as a basis that our soul doesn't die when our body does? It simply has an experience in a different embodiment?
Yeah, wonderful words. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I say, like, the soul is infinite and this experience is temporary. Depending what agreements we have for each incarnation, we can go in and out of different spaces multiple times. There have been stories where children have remembered their other lives. I remember a few years ago there was a story circulating on the internet or even on the news or something, and I think it was a boy who was born into the same family and he was a great-grandfather before, and he was talking to the parents and things like this, and he revealed details on how that life when he was in another member of the family passed away and things like this. Information that people wouldn't really know unless they were there or that person. So there's been more and more things coming out there to shed light on it, we could say.
I'm wondering if the soul has different experiences across time. Would you say that there are parts of it that remain the same, but then parts of it that change with each experience? Because as you've explained, in a past life, you had differences to who you are now, who your soul is now. So would you say that there are certain parts of the soul that remain constant and other parts that change? And is there a way that we delineate between what is likely to stay the same and what's likely to change about a soul?
It would be challenging to know for sure, but how I see it, what I've learned or remembered, is when we come into a specific incarnation, there is an aspect of the soul that surrenders itself. So if we have the idea that, or the belief in many areas, we're all one in this sense, or as energy, you can call it unconditional love, God, source, whatever. We all originate from there, if this aligns with you. And then for whatever reason, this energy decides to go into singularity consciousness for each individual part and separate itself. So as we're doing this, for example, we're choosing to have a life here on Earth, and here on Earth, literally, it's quite dense. We're in physical forms, physical matter, and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of fear-based consciousness. So that's the total opposite towards what God, source, creator is, universe, unconditional love. How I see love is one side, and the other side is fear, the opposite. So they're part of the soul that we are. When it comes into the physical incarnation, there's a part that surrenders itself so we can have this experience here in the physical reality. And that's what I call the ego. And there's been a lot of discussions where people in the spiritual world, they want to have an ego death, but I see it more as an ego remembrance. So it's the journey of realizing that we are more than what we are. We're not the body. We're love. We're unconditional love, and learning to undo all these patterns. So depending each incarnation, depending where we are, we're not always on Earth. So we can have different traits from the soul. Because I see the soul as an expansive source of energy. So it has many, many different aspects. And for example, in my case, what I know about, what I discovered about what I'm doing is I see the soul's journey is to complete the remembrance and return to blissful consciousness. So each time, each incarnation, perhaps, is a way we're undoing the fear that has been embedded into this consciousness that we've had over other incarnations. So when we come back into the physical, there will be some aspects the same, but there'll be some different. In this incarnation, I'm very different from the last time I was on Earth. In a sense, I'm not hiding as much. So there are still elements, but there's not as much as it used to be. The times I've been on Earth, I was a different gender. So I wasn't in this life, I'm male, masculine, but my other lifetimes, I've been female. And I've experienced different patterns, different personalities, and things like this. So to answer your question shortly, it depends on the experience of the soul and how much evolution we have had.
I'm wondering if there's any congruence between the spiritual definition of ego and the psychological one. So in psychology, the ego refers to the metaphysical component of our unconscious or subconscious that is trying to balance the demands of our own desire and society's expectations. So in any given situation, all of us have desires of some description, but then society imposes demands on us to behave in a certain way and function in a certain way. And if we give in to either, then we effectively either become a slave to society or we become potentially antisocial by not considering the impacts of our actions on other people. But from what I'm hearing from your description of a spiritual ego, would it be more defined in a spiritual sense as the part of yourself that has been affected by undue fear, which unconditional love seeks to overcome or mitigate?
Yeah, exactly. You put in wonderful, wonderful words. Yeah.
I understand. So effectively, I can understand now spirituality doesn't have the same definition for every person, but when people talk about spiritual wellness, it doesn't necessarily, I'm sensing by the way that I've heard that term used, it doesn't necessarily refer to any one set of beliefs or any one religion or similar philosophy. It's more the state of not being too affected by worldly decadence, perhaps we could say, because in the material world, in our societies that we've created over times, and we've created various different civilizations across different continents, across different periods of time, effectively every civilization has evolved into culture, which is a result of people's established norms, established choices, and effectively every culture has its crosses to bear. Like in every civilization, there have been things that have gone wrong that have ended in people potentially not being as well as they could be. So I'm sensing that when people talk about spiritual wellness, they talk about seeking a more universal good for us that transcends the events that we've created in our physical world, appealing to things that are good for all of us, like unconditional love and seeking meaning beyond that which we can observe with our own senses. Could that be what people mean when they talk about spiritual wellness in a more general sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I believe so. I remember the first time someone asked if I was spiritual. It was quite a few years ago when I was backpacking. I believe I was in India, 2015. And I said, I don't know. So I didn't know what it was. I think there are so many people that have ideas of what it is, but I think you put it into really good words. I keep it simple, say it's self-love. Like I do something, it's something more than as what's projected around us, like the society and things like this, just going and just really connecting in with the heart, with love. And then things will happen.
Sure. So it sounds as though from this perspective, the soul has a certain sense of what's good for it, and it is constantly seeking, as it progresses through different experiences or different embodiments, it tries to find the setting in which it is going to be able to fulfill a high good. And it sounds as though that sometimes it surrenders parts of itself that at the time it feels may not be serving it, so that it can focus on getting what is good for it. But could that be a description of what it's trying to do as it lives through its various generations?
Yeah, I would say partly for sure. So how I see the journey of the soul. So if we go back to the idea, the theory that we're all one, we're all unconditional, we're all bliss, and then if we can use how we see time. So one day, for example, this great consciousness decided to separate itself into multiple different aspects so it can have different experiences, just because maybe it got bored of all this bliss, all of this love, and just wherever it was, however it began. And then things started to happen. There's been lots of different ideas around how creation happened. What I'm familiar with, the 12 creators, but some people say the 7 creators. I just see this as like this consciousness splitting itself into 12 or 7. And then each area of this consciousness was had an intention, had a purpose of creating other different souls. For example, in this life, I believe scientists, they've already somehow made an image of the universe and see that it's curved. So that means it's growing, it's continuous. So that consciousness is ever expanding. So like the theory of the 12 creators, they keep producing more souls and all of this kind of energies. And then when we enter into different realities, so as a soul is like, imagine if you could create anything and see if you can come back to being whole as part of God's source creator consciousness, as unconditional love. So it creates many different scenarios. So perhaps being on Earth in a denser reality where there's fear and everything like this. And then how I see, when we leave a physical incarnation, parts of the consciousness that we have experienced get sort of meshed in with the source or the soul consciousness. So when we're leaving, parts of the ego, how I see that's part of the soul, that has some attachments, some other energies attached to it, personalities, shifts, and all of this. So when we're leaving, that comes up for our next incarnation. And then this cycle continues. And then, for example, in my case, in this incarnation, I had what people call an awakening, or like a remembrance kind of thing. And then so I've been recognizing patterns that have happened from other incarnations, and I'm undoing them. So rather than reacting, like what you mentioned, not having judgment on here. So that's one, not having judgment, not reacting, and acting from a neutral place as love. And then that cycle or that lesson would stop. So I've been having these for quite a few incarnations. Not all of the incarnations I have surrendered to neutrality and love. So the idea, how I see it, is actually to return to being whole again, which is full of love, full of unconditional love. So releasing the fear by each incarnation. And we come to Earth. You may have heard, even if you're skeptical, but you may have even heard like people talking about Earth as a hard place to come to as a soul. Not all souls choose to come here. And the reason being because it is such an interesting place. If we're souls and we haven't had a physical form, here we can experience all of the elements, or multiple elements. And we can go through different situations, and we can be overwhelmed by fear, by pain, and all this kind of stuff, in not only physical, but psychological. So undoing these, lifetime by lifetime, if you like, to come back to love. I see that's the journey. It's a long journey. And also, Earth, she has many names for the different dimensions of love that she's vibrated at. For example, you might have heard Earth, Pachamama, like in Latin America, they call Pachamama. Gaia has been circulating around the internet for a while because the whole movement around going into 5-dimensional consciousness and all of this. And then after you got Tara, which is based around 7th dimensional consciousness, and you got Sophia, which is 12. What I have channeled from intuition, you could say, is there's been many, many cycles over lifetimes. There've been many civilizations that vibrated higher than what we are right now. Like hundreds of thousands of years ago, for example, there was more love. So when people talk about 3D, 4D, 5D. I see that as levels of unconditional love. And so we come to Earth because Earth, she can hold many different frequencies. So we can have many different lessons. And as a soul, it's almost a very productive thing. We can get maybe 10 lifetimes of work done in one lifetime.
So effectively, consciousness is an entity or a phenomenon that exists not just within our own brains or minds, as it would be metaphysically, but it exists as an entity that effectively, of which we are all a part in some way. And if effectively that consciousness has been split in some ways, and effectively souls are attempting to rejoin as a universal and whole entity rather than being separate. Would that be a description of what's happening?
Yeah, I'd say so.
It's interesting to ponder it in those terms, and I'd say something that is worth considering for anyone really, even for one who isn't spiritual, is that we have to accept that a lot of what we have now, even though it may be functional for us, it may serve a purpose, like modern day technology, businesses, economics, different institutions like education. Overall, a lot of what we have that we've created, it has both beneficial aspects, but it also has caveats or shortcomings, negative aspects. And a lot of the problems that we have been as a result of what we have manufactured. So even though it wouldn't be reasonable to say that we should effectively remove hundreds of years worth of human evolution and get rid of modern day life, we also have to understand that we've manufactured things that our minds and bodies were not designed to deal with. They weren't designed to interact with these types of phenomena and events. A lot of the ways that we interact with each other nowadays are probably in violation of what's psychologically healthy for us. So spiritual wellness has meaning and importance well beyond just the belief in a specific religious or cultural or otherwise philosophy. It very much means, regardless of what we call it, it refers to the same important concept that there is good beyond that which we can observe in the physical world. Love can't be observed. We only observe people's actions that indicate love, but we can't observe it. It's something that's felt. There's no substitute for them in the physical world, and if we don't have it, anything in the physical world can't compensate for it. We have to have those virtues as a basis, otherwise we suffer, and we're seeing much of that today, and have seen throughout history when people have foregone that sense of universal good, that spiritual good, for that which is manufactured by humans.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many different ideas and aspects of spiritual wellness. I think at the end of the day, it comes to self-care. I believe if we all had more love for ourselves, the planet would be a happier place. There would be perhaps less confrontations, confusions. Sometimes it can be seen that there are so many distractions in the world, perhaps to try and slow us down from looking inward and loving ourselves more, resting, or perhaps a good thing, perhaps, is to learn to say no when you like to say no. For example, this was one of my big lessons in the early parts of my awakening journey, or returning to self, you can call it, is because I had a belief system where I never wanted to let anyone down, and no matter what. So I would always say yes when even my body was feeling achy or pain, or just tired, not in a good condition to go out and meet someone or some friends or whatever. So, but then once I started to listen to my body, but not only listen, but to honor the body and act on it, I would say no. And then I would find out that the people I was meeting, at least a couple of them were like, I'm so glad you said no, because I wasn't actually feeling up to it anyway. A lot of people have similar beliefs or fears about letting people down, or something like this. And then when one person from the group, from that collective, starts to speak for their own self-care, it's almost like it ripples through the consciousness, and more people will do it.
Absolutely. And again, what you're describing in psychology, we often call it people pleasing, or the more clinical and less used term for it is egoism. But we found over the years through the study of scientific psychology, which many assume is at odds with spirituality, that those phenomena are real and people do suffer from people. They can sacrifice themselves through people pleasing, and that it's important to be able to say no at critical moments. So regardless of that perspective from which we see the same matter, the outcome and the logical conclusion remains exactly the same, that we need to have boundaries and we need to know that we don't owe everyone everything, and that we have to be able to take care of ourselves, otherwise no one else will take care of us. I'm curious to explore the experience of knowing that an individual does have a past life. And I know this might be an impossible question in many ways, because if I was to ask somebody what's it like to have a memory, it can't be described other than how you experience it. I can't describe what it's like to have a memory. I just know what it's like to have a memory, and other people know what it's like to have a memory, but it's not something that can really be transmitted through language and so forth. But I'm wondering if you do have a perspective on, or have any possible description that you can give to what it's like to remember your soul in a past embodiment, and if it could be compared to any other type of memory that people may be more familiar with, or whether there's sort of differences that can be described, if that's possible.
I believe most people have had an idea or a thought that they have been in a place before. Like a place feels, if something feels familiar, like you go somewhere, and even though in this incarnation you've never been before, but you recognize many different areas. In that sense, a memory can come in. For me, it's, as what you explained, is like a knowing. Although during my awakening, there's different areas of awakening, different phases. You could say the whole lifetime is an awakening. We're always learning and learning more things. So I was in the Kundalini phase, and there's been studies in the Kundalini part of the awakening, and normally there's a crisis. A medical crisis. In this area, I lost around 17 or 18 kilos in around 2 months, just under 2 months, and it actually resulted that I was reactivating other techniques, modalities that I've practiced on, and I doused that I actually had a tumor, and then I went to the hospital, and was sort of verified and all this kind of stuff. And this coincided when I had one of the involuntary past life regressions. I was actually stabbed in the Ottoman Empire around my intestines. So we call it in chakras, it's the solar plexus, which is just around the stomach area. And that's where I had the tumor. It was in the smaller intestine, and the person or the soul that did that action in our lifetime, I was working with her I used to teach English. I was in Spain, and she was a colleague, and it was her, but in the Ottoman Empire, in our lifetime, she had the role as being a male figure. And we're just on different opposite sides of the war, or whatever you call it, kind of thing, of that experience. So I had different alignments popping up when I had that past life regression. It was knowings, but then also in my physical reality for this incarnation, things were aligning. So I guess there was a knowing, and then I had that experience. I was reliving a pain, but not through a stabbing, but it just came up as what we call a disease, an illness, a tumor for a temporary amount of time. So at this time of my experience, lots of things were aligning for me, like different feats to go on to. I wasn't searching for spiritual awakenings or things like this, to be honest, even though I practiced energy healing back then, but I was never interested in the theory. Like theory as in the spirituality, or the different meanings of different things. It wasn't an importance to me. But then it kept coming up to me. The universe, God, source was bringing it in my feed, and I was reading things and learning things, and I was able to discern with my heart what was in alignment with me and what wasn't. So I had these things, and I believe that lots of people, normally I believe when people go to a place, when they get a knowing or a feeling, a sensation, that they've been there before or they remember it. This is a similar kind of knowing that comes into each individual. And I think because it's not something that's spoken about, there's a part of the ego self, the human self, that would dismiss it because it thinks it's like the expression is coming into mind as poppycock. It doesn't make sense to the human mind, so it just goes dismissed. But I believe that a lot of people have had different experiences where they may have been somewhere, or they've had a past life regression in a dream, but because maybe in their circle, in their family, it doesn't resonate with them, so they don't want to share it, so they just put it down. I think this happens quite a lot, but I believe it comes in as a knowing, and then sometimes the body will react in one way or another.
As a counsellor, I receive referrals from others, and I also like to help my audience become aware of resources and other providers which may be beneficial, as well as help other individuals and organisations gain exposure. That's why I host the Your Listener Partner Network, and I'd like to thank my partners for their support. I'd like to introduce Ali's Place Counselling. On the scenic Mornington Peninsula, Ali's Place provides individual, couple and family counselling with specialisation in relationship therapy. Their devoted team provides a warm, welcoming and safe environment and treats each client as an individual to help them to tell their unique stories, untangle their situations, build healthy relations with themselves and others, and ultimately find a route to where they would like to be. They work with a range of different concerns and teach crucial communication, conflict management, and problem-solving skills. They are also home to the Ali's Place Academy, developing the skills of both newer and more experienced therapists. Find them at www.alisplace.com.au. It's fascinating, and imagine the awkwardness of knowing that you're working with someone who tried to potentially kill you in a past life. That would have been rather confronting. I'm curious because you mentioned that you had an awakening at the point of a medical crisis, but that even prior to that point you had practiced energy healing. I'm wondering, before that point, were you having any type of inner experience that was very much felt in a spiritual sense? And if so, can you remember when you started to have those experiences?
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure what it's like to be neurotypical. So I don't know what that feels like, but having autism, it's always felt like that I've been a third party in this life, like I'm viewing from outside of my body. And that sort of resonates when people have autism or neurodiverse. They're more susceptible to other frequencies because we're not fully shielded by a physical vessel kind of thing. A lot of this incarnation has felt like I've just been on autopilot. I wasn't in full control, but there has been some occasions before actually I did. No, I was doing energy practice before then. So there was one time I like jungles and I really like waterfalls. So I was in Tobago in a place called Castara, a fishing village. And in my time off, I went to the jungle and I wanted to find the route of the waterfalls. So I just walked in the jungle and thinking I'm only going to be there and come back. Over there, it gets dark at 6 p.m. without fail every day, just how it is for some reason. So I left at 12, so I figured I'd be back before it gets dark, but I kept going and kept going. I was enjoying it so much. I ended up spending the night there accidentally, and I got lost. And when I got lost, there was a bit of panic, but then I decided to settle somewhere before it got pitch black. I made a bed out of banana leaves and things like this on the floor. And then I heard a voice. I probably heard voices in the head before, like the inner critic or something, but this was different. It was very clear. And it said, not here. So then I figured I'll just listen to it and move along. And actually, it wasn't the first time I heard a voice. I had another experience before that, because in this, I spent 6 months in the Caribbean, and I was doing Workaway, which is a voluntary program, and I was accepted to stay in the jungle with a tribe, but I was guided not to, and I wasn't aware of guidance or anything like this. I just heard a voice, just had a strong feeling not to go. And if I had went, I wouldn't be here today, because there was a hurricane. I was there in Dominica Island, and it went all the way through the island, and there wouldn't be any protection in that area of the jungle. I stayed somewhere else, and I still didn't think I was going to make it, but I did. So in this 6 months, I had 2 or 3 different experiences of hearing a voice when to keep me out of certain danger, we could say. And then going back to when I was in the jungle in Tobago, there was one point where egoically, we could say, mentally, I just gave up because I was trying to go. I was stuck in the jungle. And then something came over my body and sort of made me to stand up. And I managed to climb up huge rocks, like, I don't know, I'm just looking at the ceiling I'm at now, so about, bigger than where I'm staying, it's a standard ceiling kind of, and 2 of them, 3 of them. And then when I climbed those 3 rocks, and I was barefoot, so I normally walk barefoot these days anyway, or with barefoot shoes. I recognized the part of the jungle from yesterday, so then I could make it home. But so there was these 3 experiences. I had voices, and I believe these voices were a higher aspect of my consciousness coming in. I've also met people on this journey. It was actually these 6 months, the first person I stayed with, I was volunteering, he was a clairvoyant, so he could see which normal eyes don't see, non-physicals. So he was connecting with my spirit team, and I never heard about spirit teams or anything like this. And I was like, why couldn't I see? So that's wasn't my own experience, but then he was there talking to me about these kind of things. But I didn't have so much of an interest, so to speak. But then during these 6 months, I had these 3 other experiences of hearing a voice internally to keep me safe, I guess. So.
It's a fascinating and rich history that you've described. Something that you've mentioned quite critically is that when you've reflected on, or when people have reflected on their past incarnations, they've been able to remember their souls being involved in an embodiment that did happen and it was verifiable. So there might be, I'm imagining there might be historical records of particular events taking place, and what this person can remember was very much a part of the events that were recorded, for example, or they can remember events having taken place with somebody else, and a descendant of that person might be able to verify that those particular events took place. So that verification is a critical aspect here. Some time ago, I had a discussion with a fellow podcaster, Ebony Womaki of Ebb and Flow, and she's an intuitive reader, which I understand that it's not necessarily considered to be exactly the same as a psychic, but there are similarities in terms of the phenomenology of that. She can know of facts about other people that could not otherwise be known unless normally somebody was actually there to witness the events. So she can read intuitively, so to speak. We had a discussion about this, and one of the questions we pondered was, how do we discern the spiritual experience that she's describing, or indeed the experience of having remembered a past life, from what Western psychology might consider that? In many clinical contexts, having those experiences is considered to be psychotic or psychosis. And for those who don't know this, it's important that we understand what this term means, because it's used way too loosely, and we really need to understand the specificity of it. So psychosis is clinically defined as not being able to understand the difference between reality and fantasy. I asked Ebony, how do we tell the difference between a spiritual experience and a psychotic one? Her suggestion was, psychosis by definition is part of a mental illness, and a mental illness causes distress by definition, whereas what I experience doesn't cause me any distress. It's actually something that I can use for the greater good and that I can use for spiritual good. And at the same time, I'm able to verify with other people that what I'm reflecting is real, because the only other people who could verify it are verifying it. I'm wondering if you've come into contact with these different perspectives before, and if you have a perspective about whether the Western definition of psychosis is a useful one or a valid one, or whether it disregards a lot of the experiences that you're describing that people are increasingly describing that they have.
Wow, it's very interesting because I'm in the process of putting a book together about spirituality and mental health, because there's lots of things that, like schizophrenia and different kind of diagnoses, are, we could say, how I would call it, related to soul studies. For example, if a soul is fragmented, it is possible for a soul to be fragmented through different traumas experienced. So, for example, after reincarnation, when we finished an incarnation, if we experience something that's so unloving, so painful, the energy that we are as a soul will, because we still hold on to parts of that human experience we just had, or if we were another planetary system, that we would be reactionary and cut that aspect of the soul off. So we're fragmenting ourselves, and then later on in other incarnations, if we have if in that incarnation you've chosen or you've discovered you have some kind of awareness that we are the soul, we can start to do practices to recover lost energy, lost parts of the soul. But for example, if we do some of these practices on a place like Earth without correct discernment, we can actually embody other fractals or fragments of a soul that's actually not our own. And then having these kind of energies meshed together can cause identity dissolution. You wouldn't know who you are, kind of thing. You can literally have two different soul energies working together, and that can cause confusion. So this is something that I'm actually, with a friend, Caroline, we are preparing some books around this. She's got questions, and I'll be channeling, using the connection that I have, some ideas, perspectives around this area. So there is a lot of, I would say, misdiagnosis, or because I think it basically comes from a lack of understanding, because I'm not sure nowadays, perhaps it's more open to do higher conscious studies or soul studies nowadays. But before, or we'll say before, so in the last few hundred years, maybe not so much, but perhaps hundreds of thousands of years ago, yes, they were very well connected, or even a few thousand years ago. So around this, I see there's a lot of different things, like we're finishing a book on autism as well, ADHD, and it's the same kind of thing as a soul. We've chosen this, but then ADHD is having, how I see it, is the part of the soul is actually trying to locate other aspects of the soul. So it's always out there, kind of thing, and hyperactive and moving around. Hard to keep grounded in this reality, because that part of the soul is looking for other parts of fragments, if that makes sense. So I guess with other things, with identity, it's confusing. And also, it's very possible when there is a practitioner for a past life regression, the practitioner can accidentally guide the incoherent part of the soul, so another fragment from another soul, and then they can be guiding an experience that is not the actual person. Again, this is not something that's spoken so much about in the spiritual community, I guess, but it is possible if you've received a reading from some reader, they might believe they're reading very accurately, but they're reading another aspect of the soul that is actually not your own aspect, another fragment. So when one has higher awareness or discernment, it does help a lot, but then it does take time, practice, and belief and trust, I guess, in self, and knowing what is there's ways to connect with your subconscious. There's something called muscle testing. So you get your yes and no sway test. You may have heard of it or something, but yeah.
So in effect, we could say that there is such a phenomenon as psychosis or mental illness, but it's very much distinct from spiritual experiences. It's just that sometimes we mistake spiritual experiences for psychosis because we don't understand them. And so psychosis or other mental illnesses may result from, we could say, spiritual mishaps, but an actual spiritual experience guides you towards greater good. And so it's actually adaptive, whereas mental illness or psychosis is maladaptive. It guides us towards potential harm or guides us away from survival.
Yes, for sure. There are perhaps other things to come into as well. There are such things as like negative entities and forms of possession, if you like, in some senses. Again, for example, if there is someone that's constantly angry and doing harm to self or others, it'd be like a thought form on repeat, and this thought form can be a darker entity from another realm. We could just call it like that. So there are, like, I would say, like some aspects of mental illness. Yes, will definitely be a form of mental illness on its own, but there could be also other parts. Not only having it from a spiritual experience, but also we can call it a negative spiritual experience of experiencing a psychic attack or an entity kind of thing, possession. Like, there are still many areas in the world where I would say where people practice the darker arts, and I believe it's been proven that we are all in fact energy beings, like atoms and all this kind of stuff. So we all create things. So when we have a thought form or a belief, we're actually creating an energy frequency, an energy field. And for those that are clairvoyant, they will see an energy form. So if like a simple psychic attack is simply sending unloving thoughts towards someone, and if you're very highly sensitive, I'm quite sensitive, and I was able to know if someone was unhappy with me, for example, because I'd feel it in my body. I would say, I didn't know you were unhappy with me, what did I do? Kind of thing. And then if someone is really doing ceremony, I would say it's just intention, full intention. If you're putting so much intention to sending a form of negative energy towards someone, it will be enhanced. And then more and more, and there are other forms of energy beings that can latch onto this, and then the energy field will have like holes in, and then there'll be gaps in for them to come in. Like I would say alcohol and things like this, it brings in a lower energy. And when humans have experienced blackout, and then people would say they've done things that's never in their character to do, how I see it, and how clairvoyants will see this as well, is that, well, it wasn't you that was doing it, because your spirit, you're the soul, you left the body because the body came so contaminated with an energy, and another being came in and was having fun with it. And the reason why we come back is our energy as a soul, we're always connected to our body, but we can leave it, but we're still connected, so we can come back in. Unless it was severed. There are sometimes the energy can be severed. We can be severed from our physical form, but it's rare.
I'd like to ponder another aspect of this subject, and it's the empirical aspect. Now, something worth considering before we do that is that people often misconstrue the purpose of science because they consider it to be at odds with spirituality, and they consider science to be some kind of universal truth, but people often misconstrue what its virtue is, and a lot of people might scoff, so to speak, at spirituality because they might say, well, it's not scientific, or it therefore is not true. But there's something that's really important for everyone to ponder here. The real virtue of science isn't to suggest that everything that exists in the world must be demonstrated or must be discoverable. The reason we place so much emphasis on it is that the way that our minds work usually is we tend to favor what's concrete and what we can actually observe through the five senses. And most people have that experience, that they have difficulty pondering what they can't observe through the senses. The virtue of science is that it provides verification of what's happening through the world by being able to use the five senses. And if we use the five senses, then it's the observations that we make and the conclusions that we draw are more likely to be objective, that is to say, consistent between people. But just because we can't observe something, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that many of us, or most of us, haven't found a way yet to observe it or to experience it. And there are people who are having these experiences that you've described. Now, some of these experiences, as you said, are verifiable. For example, if an intuitive reader makes an intuitive reading of someone, that person can then verify what they just, if it's in enough detail, with enough specificity, that other person can then verify whether it's true or not. And if it is true, then clearly the phenomenon is real. The same with having a past life. There may be historical records or descendants that can detail what happened at a particular event that you would never have been able to know unless you're actually there. So those aspects are verifiable. It's just a matter of whether somebody else believes it or not. But the verification, if it's true, then it's certainly there. What I'm curious to ponder is, what about some of these aspects that are harder to observe, harder to demonstrate? For example, the idea that ADHD, or attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, may be a manifestation of a fragmented soul, or different mental illnesses being the result of a soul accepting a fragmented part of another soul. Are there ways that we can verify that? How do we know that that's what we're actually experiencing and not that it might not be another phenomenon objectively? What's the process of verifying, if it's possible to do so?
Honestly, at the moment, I'm not sure if there is a humanistic way to verify this other than actually going through the practice of perhaps a guided meditation on recovering aspects of the soul and then seeing that person change, transform. I believe that's an acceptable human way to do it. Then that would be the test, so to speak. But until these experiments are done more commonly or more in the light, because I believe lots of people practicing different things but are perhaps fearful of being caught by some kind of society or something like this, say keeping it hidden. But I believe it is just done by practice. And again, then there could be other intuitives, right? That they can also, if there's 10 intuitives and we all get the same information separately in separate rooms or whatever like this, there's something there. So you were mentioning five senses. I believe everyone has more than five senses. There may be five senses that we can fully describe, but there are more. Or we're using the main five senses and then expanding upon them. Yeah, intuition, I believe, is a whole another sense that we all have. And it could be using the main five senses, or it could be something added on, like a sixth sense. Like I know there's a film, like the Spider-Man, the spider sense, knowing, feeling there's a danger happening. We have this. I believe the majority of us has this. When we're perhaps more centered within ourselves, we'll notice more things. If we go into a jungle or a forest, or somewhere not in a city, we'll become calmer. We're less bombarded by energies, and we'll notice more of our own selves. Perhaps this can be other senses as well. Yeah, I believe by actually doing the practice, making experiments around this with people, and then seeing the shifts. I know for myself that if I hadn't activated a particular energy within my system, I wouldn't be speaking to you today. I know people have seen other episodes, or I've been guest on other podcasts, and someone said they've seen my evolvement, how I've evolved. Because I continually work on myself, recovering aspects of my soul, doing healings on myself, and all of this kind of thing. And it's brought up more communication, more verbiage, like, different words coming in and all this kind of stuff. And generally feeling more comfortable in my human body as well. So I guess in that sense, yes, because in this incarnation I also have ADHD as well. So these are subjects I've been interested in mental health for a while, even before I was consciously aware of my connection, we could say, because even without knowing what the soul was, all this kind of thing, I thought there's got to be something to it. And for me, maybe it's because I'm neurodiverse, it seems quite obvious that there is more than one dominating spirit within the body that's causing these kind of confusions type things as well. So, but it's trickier to prove it, I guess. But what I would like, I've said to people that I would like to have my brain analyzed when I'm channeling or something like this, or just to see what, the scientists will pick up on. And I actually believe that science and spirituality is very similar, because at the end of the day, they get the same conclusions. Maybe science might take a bit longer than some forms of spirituality, but it gets there. And also with, for whatever reason, I've been drawn to psychologists kind of thing. So there's also a meeting point. And I wouldn't say they're all so different. I think we're all part of the same family in a sense. So that's how I see it.
Science and the metaphysical can be good friends. They can sit alongside each other, and there's far more in common between the two than what we often accept that there is. So many aspects of spirituality that you've described, psychology has, as you've said, demonstrated that those are good for us, seeking virtue beyond the material. There's a lot of this in religion as well. A lot of people say that religion is unscientific, but what religion has done for civilizations across time is provided structure and hope. And when people have structure and hope, they discipline themselves, they work harder towards their goals, they put in more effort, they're more restrained, and as a result of that, their mind becomes healthier. Now, whether what that particular religion believes in terms of a creator is actually true or not actually becomes a secondary matter. The primary matter is that what the religion does for that person is beneficial for them psychologically. So even if a lot of spiritual phenomena can't be empirically demonstrated yet, because we only know of the five senses in science, perhaps they're the ones that we can describe completely, but as you said, can be more senses. And even though we can't demonstrate beyond those five senses just yet in the same way that we could spiritually, that's not to say that one day we won't be able to, and maybe more people will be able to have those experiences that you've described and realize it more. We have to realize that nothing that we create is perfect. It's a best guess. So science may not be able to explain it yet, but that doesn't mean that it won't happen. There's too much rivalry between the two perspectives, rather than being able to accept that perhaps science and spirituality came from exactly the same source, and they're both different routes to, as you say, this exactly the same conclusions. The two facets of the argument should be more harmonious with one another, and at the same time, a lot of people say, well, intuition isn't empirical. If you just feel something, how can you really verify it? Well, I've argued before that your intuition may result from knowledge that you don't even know you have. Your mind can detect details and gather information in ways that you may not even be aware of. And when you're accessing that intuition, you may be accessing information that is empirical. Like you've observed it yourself. You may just not realize it. And I've said before that having a sense of intuition is part of survival. You can't survive if you're trying to empirically analyze absolutely everything. You wouldn't have time to do it. Your intuition plays an important part in your life. It just has to be sound intuition. But as long as it's sound intuition, it's incredibly important to have it. I think it's one of the most important parts of a healthy mind is knowing when to trust your intuition and knowing when to doubt it.
Yeah, the doubts around the intuition happens a lot, and sometimes it can be for good cause, because perhaps if you notice that your intuition is feeling a bit different, the energy, the frequency just feels a bit off. If, for example, if I'm not balanced or centered, I wouldn't make a choice, like a decision. So I mentioned muscle testing or the sway test with your consciousness. So ideally, one would do this balanced after some quiet time. You can meditate, you can do some breathing exercises, and not to be attached to the outcome. So this is where we go into balance and neutrality, and then go into the muscle testing. So I think doubting the intuition actually sometimes comes from a deeper intuition that there could be something off in the system that you're working from. We're very complex beings, actually, and I'm not sure if in the physical form we will ever actually fully understand how we all work completely. I think we're all learning in this. I believe a lot of people are connected to their spirit without knowing. And this can happen if people have always wanted to go to a particular country. Like in my case, I've always wanted to go to Galapagos Islands or Cuba or something like this. Or even before this, I moved to Spain. I didn't know why I wanted to go to Spain. I never studied Spanish. And then the first life that I remember having, I was actually in Spain. And I've always wanted to go to Granada. And in another life, I was buried near Granada. So these kind of things, this memory of energy follows through. So this intuition, we all have it. It's there. When we start to listen to ourselves, I believe we will start seeing different shifts, different changes in our natural reality and external reality with the people we're working with or our surroundings, our families. Something I notice, actually, I don't live in England, but when I go back to England, I see my mum and my brother and sister, my siblings. I notice they have grown as I have grown at the same time. So there is a theory that we are our own universe in a sense. So the more we work on ourselves, our external reality is also transforming. Before we came on, John asked me how many languages do I speak? And I said I speak 2 humanistic languages, but I also channel different languages from my soul. And you don't need to understand what this means. It's more about feeling. So I'm just going to bring in a few words. It will sound maybe like tones or mantras or something like this. Kunoa maha maha. You can just take a couple of deep breaths. Kuomba naha kia nahana dohoku. Kuona naha kia tahana hadai. Sokuna taha ke kia tahana. Sunna kaha ke kia taha. Sukua maha kia tahana hadehi. Suko sukoi. So I was just bringing a little bit of language, and the intention was just to bring soothing in this, basically. It's almost like a remembrance. So I asked because I wanted this opportunity just to share and just to see if anyone felt something, because we feel things, so we may not understand it. So thank you.
No, it's my pleasure, Benjamin, and thank you for bringing those wishes and those sentiments into the space. I really appreciate it. And I'd really like to thank you for joining me on the program today, because, as I like to say, I'm not necessarily here to provide definite answers. What I do want is to raise more questions that people can then go out, take into the world and ask for themselves. And I really appreciate this opportunity to raise these types of questions and prompt people to think more about what we don't know. Links will be in the description of this episode for anyone who wants to find you. And Benjamin, are you guesting on podcasts on an ongoing basis? Is that something that you'd like people to contact you for?
Oh yes, please. Yeah, I'm open on an ongoing process for sure. Yeah, I like to share where there's people that's interested. So.
And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us today. As usual, if you have concerns about yourself or someone else, please seek advice from a professional or someone else you trust. If you are in Australia and are seeking counselling from me, you can find my details in the description of this episode. And to anyone out there, if you have any feedback, whether you'd like to be a guest, whether you'd like to suggest a subject for discussion, or otherwise, please feel free to contact me. I love to hear from my audience. And until next time, take care.